His hand hovered near the door handle a second longer than it needed to. I stood across the room, halfway through organizing the quarterly files, pretending not to notice the way his gaze slid over the blinds. One click, the lock turned. The sound was soft, barely louder than the tick of the clock on the wall, but it changed everything. My breath caught. I didn't say a word. We weren't supposed to be the last ones here. It was a Friday, late, but not unusual. Reports needed to be finalized. He asked if I could stay. I said yes before thinking. It wasn't about the work. It never really was. The air between us had been different for weeks. Little things. His fingers brushing mine when we passed papers. The way he leaned in when explaining edits. His tie just a little looser when I was the only one left in the room. I glanced up from the folder, pretending to reread a line. He stepped forward slowly, like the distance between us was something that needed permission to close. His shoes were quiet on the carpet. My fingers tightened on the folder. I didn't move. The silence wasn't awkward. It was electric. When he reached my desk, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, direct, focused, like I was no longer his assistant, like the professional lines we both spent so long drawing had already been erased. I swallowed my throat dry. He tilted his head slightly. I knew he was waiting for a signal, but I didn't give one. I didn't step away either. His hand came to rest on the back of my chair, close but not touching me. "If you want to leave," he said, voice low, steady, "you should do it now." I looked up at him. My lips parted, but nothing came out. I blinked slowly, then closed the folder. He didn't need more than that. His fingers slid down the side of the chair and found the edge of the desk. He leaned in his breath, brushing the side of my face. Still not touching, still not saying what we both knew was about to happen. The office didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a secret. "I've been trying not to do this," he murmured. I said, "Then don't." But I didn't move. He smiled barely, the kind that meant he heard what I wasn't saying. I stood first. He didn't stop me. He didn't help either. I walked to the other side of the room, toward the conference table, not the door. I placed the folder down gently. He followed. We didn't speak again. Not when he closed the blinds. Not when his hand brushed the side of my waist. Not when I turned to face him and everything in my body screamed that this was reckless, wrong, unprofessional, and something I had already decided to let happen. His hand landed on the table beside me, flat. Still, I felt the air shift before I felt his body behind mine. He wasn't in a hurry, neither was I. He touched the edge of my sleeve, like testing the fabric, like asking something wordless. My skin burned beneath it. I didn't turn around. He didn't make me. We stood there side by side, but not equal until I leaned back half an inch. That was enough. His arms came around me, not tightly, just there, just solid. I rested my hands on the table, fingers spread. The surface was cool. His breath caught once when I tilted my head slightly toward him. I heard it quiet, surprised. The fluorescent lights above buzzed like they didn't want to witness this. When his lips finally met the skin just behind my ear, I didn't close my eyes. I just let it happen, and I let everything else follow. It started long before that door ever locked. Maybe not in touch, but in glances, in the way his voice dropped when he asked for things only I could deliver, in the way I lingered a little too long at his office door at the end of meetings. I told myself it was respect. I told myself it was professionalism. But respect doesn't make your stomach drop when he says your name. And professionalism doesn't make you remember the way his tie was crooked after lunch meetings. He wasn't just my boss. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays and noticed haircuts, but never made a show of it. He spoke in measured tones, even when upset. His desk was always clear by 5:01, but he never left before 7. There was something about the way he carried silence, like it gave him power. I'd been working under him for a year and a half. No late night texts, no casual invitations, no warning, but there were signs. At the copier, he once stepped in closer than necessary and didn't move until I did. In a meeting, he let his fingers rest against mine for a second too long when passing the agenda packet. Harmless, unspoken, denied. And still I replayed it. We were always careful, always surrounded until we weren't. That Friday was just a deadline. That's all it was supposed to be. I stayed because I always stayed, because he trusted me with the final review, because I liked the quiet after everyone else left. I liked hearing his voice across the empty office. I liked knowing I was the last one he said goodnight to. He didn't say much that evening, just asked if I needed anything. Brought me a coffee without sugar, just how I take it. Watched me work like he was memorizing something. When I reached for the stapler, our hands touched. He didn't flinch, neither did I. I should have walked away. I had a boyfriend then. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't boring, just distant, just elsewhere. We shared groceries, shared a lease, shared calendars, but we hadn't shared skin in weeks. I stopped noticing the gap until someone else stood close enough to remind me what attention felt like. So no, it wasn't sudden. It was built slowly, quietly, in glances and post-its, in questions that didn't need asking. I don't remember the first time I imagined it. I just know that by the time he locked that door, the idea wasn't new. It had been waiting. We both had. When I leaned back into him, when I felt his breath on my neck, when I didn't pull away, none of that was confusion. It was permission. There was a dinner party the weekend before. My boyfriend had scrolled through his phone while I set the table. He didn't ask what I was wearing. He didn't notice I had worn the lipstick he used to comment on. When our friends left, he fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on. I lay in bed, awake, fully dressed. I remember thinking I could disappear and it would take him days to notice. But my boss noticed every shift, every silence, every time I hesitated in the hallway, like I didn't want to go home just yet. He didn't ask questions. He didn't fill the space. He just let it stretch between us until I stopped pretending it wasn't there. That night, the door didn't just lock. Something else did. Not my conscience, just everything that used to hold me back. It was a Tuesday, ordinary. I was late. The elevator was slow. I walked in with my blouse clinging to my back, heat still pulsing from the street. I didn't expect him to be standing at the copier. He usually came in later, but that morning, there he was, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, one hand braced on the glass, like he was waiting for more than just paper. I mumbled a greeting. He didn't reply right away, just looked up, a pause that stretched long enough for me to hear my own breath. Then he said, "You look rushed." I said, "I am." He nodded. "You don't need to be," then turned back to the machine. The paper jammed. He cursed under his breath. I stepped forward, offered to help. Our hands brushed. A quick, accidental thing. I said, "Sorry." He didn't say anything, just let his fingers linger a beat longer than necessary. I walked away faster than I needed to. Didn't look back. Didn't have to. I could feel it. Something had shifted. The next time it happened, it was even smaller. We both reached for the same folder at the front desk. His hand landed first. He looked at me, waited. I didn't pull mine back, not right away. I pretended to read the label. He said, "Go ahead." I took it, but I remember the shape of his fingers days later. That's how it was. Not fireworks, not flirtation, just tension. Slow, warm, persistent, like a match never struck, but always ready. There was one night we stayed late, me working on a budget sheet, him on a client call. I could hear his voice through the wall, low, calm. It soothed something in me I didn't want to name. When I left, he walked me to the elevator. No reason, no urgency. He stood beside me, hands in pockets. The light above us flickered. I looked up, then looked at him. He didn't smile, he didn't move, but he said, "You're good at what you do." I said, "So are you." He nodded, then said, "Good night," and walked away. I stood in that elevator, thinking about his voice, his words, the way he didn't compliment my appearance, only my mind, and why that made me want him more. We never touched in those weeks, not in any way that mattered. But sometimes I think that made it worse, because the moment the distance finally closed, it didn't feel like the start of something. It felt like the end of restraint. Another time, he called me into his office. I thought it was about a client note, but he didn't open the file. He just asked how I was doing, not with a smile, not casually, just that. "How are you doing?" I paused, unsure if it was small talk. I said, "Fine." He nodded slowly, then said, "You always say that." I didn't answer. He let the silence hang for a moment before waving me off with a quiet, "That's all." But I walked out feeling like I had confessed something. After that, I became aware of him in a new way. The sound of his footsteps, the way he leaned on the doorframe when speaking to others, but stood straighter with me. Once he returned my pen, the one with the cracked grip. He'd kept it. I hadn't even noticed it was gone. And there was the way he watched me in meetings. Not openly, but his gaze always found mine when someone made a bad joke or when I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. He didn't smile. He just noticed. Those weren't grand moments. They weren't cinematic, but they made everything else inevitable. I sat at my desk on Monday like nothing had happened. The reports were still due. The phone still rang. My inbox was still full, but everything felt shifted, like the office was tilted half a degree and no one else noticed. I opened spreadsheets, typed replies, nodded through meetings. I didn't look at him. He didn't look at me. But I felt him in the quiet moments between tasks, in the heat behind my neck when I turned too fast. In the chair, he didn't pull closer during the conference call. That morning, I reapplied lipstick twice and wiped it off both times. I didn't tell anyone, not my best friend, not the boyfriend who asked if I wanted takeout that night and kissed my forehead like I hadn't let another man breathe against my skin. I sat beside him on the couch, nodded at the movie, laughed once too loud. He fell asleep. I watched the ceiling, listened to the refrigerator hum, and the clock click past midnight. At work, we didn't speak about it. There was no text, no smirk, no second invitation. I told myself that was good. I told myself it meant nothing, but my body remembered too much. The way his breath landed between my shoulder blades. The way his voice changed just before the blinds closed. The way I had pressed back into him before he ever reached for me. It was a line I had already crossed before I knew I'd left the other side. I started leaving the office earlier. He didn't stop me. I avoided being alone in rooms with him. I copied files slower, kept my door open wider, answered emails with less warmth. I tried to reset, pretend, rebuild something I'd barely protected. Then, one afternoon, he stood in my doorway, folder in hand, neutral face. "You have a second?" I hesitated. Too long. He stepped inside. I watched him like I didn't know him, like he hadn't already touched places I never let anyone see. He placed the folder on the desk, then just stood there, waiting. I said, "Is this about work?" He said, "I don't know." He didn't move. Neither did I. The office was full. Voices echoed down the hall. But this space felt soundless, sealed. I could have said something sharp, something final, but I didn't. I reached for the folder. My fingers brushed his. "It wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "Tell me to stop." I opened the folder, looked at a spreadsheet I didn't register. My mouth felt dry. I didn't look up. I said, "You shouldn't be here." He nodded and then said, "But I am." He left, but the air he brought in stayed. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than usual. I had washed my face twice. My skin felt raw. I stared at my own mouth like it belonged to someone I didn't trust. I whispered out loud just once, "This is wrong." But even as I said it, I felt the words loosen in my throat like they didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't sleep. I kept thinking of the folder, the silence, the way he said, "But I am," like he wasn't apologizing, like he knew I wouldn't tell him to leave. And the worst part was I didn't want to. It didn't happen in the office again. The second time was on a Saturday. I had come in to grab a folder I forgot before a Monday pitch. The building was half dark. I didn't expect him to be there. But as soon as the elevator doors opened, I saw his car parked outside. Same spot, same angle, like he hadn't left at all. I stepped inside cautiously, hoping to grab the file and leave without being seen. But he was already standing in the hallway, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. No tie, sleeves rolled, shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked at me and didn't even blink. "You left your brief," he said. I nodded, just came to grab it. He didn't move, didn't smile, just said, "Come on, it's in the archive room." I followed. The archive room wasn't like the rest of the office. No windows, old carpeting, filing cabinets against every wall, a long metal table in the center, usually unused. I stepped inside first. He didn't shut the door, but the click, when it swung behind him, felt louder than it should have. The buzz of the air conditioning, the soft ding of the elevator, the squeak of a chair shifting 2 rows behind me. Around noon, I went to the restroom, checked my reflection. Too much blush, eyes too wide. I leaned against the sink and breathed. When I returned, there was a note on my desk, folded once, no name, just a time, 4:15, nothing else. I didn't touch it for 10 minutes. Then I slid it into the drawer, closed it gently. At 4:15, I didn't go anywhere, but someone else did. A coworker, Lauren, passed me in the hallway. "Hey," she said, half smiling. "Saw your guy walking toward the copy room, looking intense." I nodded. My heart tightened. "Thanks." I waited 5 minutes, then 6, then stood. The copy room was empty, except for the smell, his cologne. Subtle, faint, but unmistakable. I turned to leave, but behind me, the door creaked. Another colleague walked in, looked at me, raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" I nodded too quickly, just grabbing some staples. He didn't press, but he lingered a second longer than he needed to, then left. That night, I took a long shower, hot, burning, like I could steam the memory out of my skin. My boyfriend knocked on the door once. "You okay?" "Fine," I said. I wasn't. We didn't speak much over dinner. I pushed food around my plate. He scrolled through his phone. At one point, he looked up and said, "You've been quiet lately." I shrugged. "Just work," he nodded. "Your boss writing you again?" I choked on a laugh I didn't mean. Something like that. He didn't notice. After dinner, he leaned in to kiss my cheek. I flinched, just slightly, barely, but he noticed. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." He studied me for a second longer than usual, then said nothing, went to the living room and turned on the TV. I stood in the kitchen, fingers still curled around the edge of my plate. I didn't move. The faucet dripped once, twice. My pulse matched it later when he fell asleep on the couch. I opened my phone, scrolled to a blank message, typed nothing, deleted it, locked the screen, stared into the dark like it could make a decision for me. It didn't. It happened again the following week. Not in the archive room, not in the office at all. He asked if I could drop something off at the client's studio. It wasn't unusual. We often handled deliveries when schedules were tight. I said yes without checking in my calendar. Maybe I already knew he'd be there. Maybe part of me was hoping he would be. The studio was in a converted brick building downtown. Exposed beams, concrete floors, paint-stained light fixtures, the kind of space where every sound echoed. I found the folder, left it on the front desk, turned to leave. But then I heard his voice. "You're early." I turned. He was leaning against the doorway. No tie again. Sleeves rolled like the version of him that only existed when no one else was around. "I thought I was late," I said. He didn't answer that, just watched me. I should have left. I reached for the door. "Wait," he said. I did. He walked forward slow, measured, not predatory, just inevitable. "There's no one else here," he said. "They're out for lunch." I nodded. "I should still go." "You should." But again, I didn't. There was a stool by the window, high metal, cold looking. He sat on it, elbows on his knees, gaze steady. "You've been avoiding me." I said nothing. "Why? I think you know." He stood again across the room. "I don't regret it." He said I did, and I didn't. I regretted that I didn't regret it sooner. He stood in front of me, hands in pockets, close but not touching. "If you tell me to stop, I will." I should have. I didn't. He reached out, fingers curling lightly around my wrist. Not tight, just there. I didn't pull away. This time it was slower. He didn't rush. His thumb traced the edge of my palm, like he was memorizing the shape of restraint. He stepped behind me, his breath near my ear. I closed my eyes. This wasn't about lust. Not anymore. It was about a razor, about stepping out of who I was supposed to be and into the version of myself that could exist only in rooms like this, dim, quiet, disconnected from everything clean. He pulled me closer. The table pressed against my thighs, his hands flattened against the wall on either side of me, caging me in without ever forcing me. When I turned to face him, we didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. This time, when he kissed me, it was soft, controlled, like he was trying to undo the first time. But it only made me fall deeper. Somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed. We both froze. He didn't move his hands. I didn't step away, but we both listened to silence, to our breathing, to the outside world, trying to remind us where we were. He whispered, "Still want me to stop?" I didn't answer. He didn't need one. My phone buzzed in my bag. We both heard it. I didn't reach for it. The vibration stopped, then started again. A name lit up my mind before the screen ever lit up my boyfriend. I finally pulled away, just enough. I should go. He nodded, but he didn't let go of my wrist until I was halfway to the door. I didn't go back to the studio. He didn't call. He didn't text. We walked past each other twice that week, once near the copy machine and once by the elevators. Both times we didn't break stride, but I saw at the pause just under his skin the hesitation he refused to show. I mirrored it. I buried it. My boyfriend asked if I wanted to get away for the weekend. I said yes. We drove north past the traffic, past the silence between us that neither of us had the vocabulary to name. We stayed in a rented cabin with a wooden deck and a fireplace that smoked too much. I packed books I didn't read. I brought the sweater he once complimented, but he didn't notice I wore it. He kissed my shoulder before bed. I turned off the lamp before he could see my face. The next morning, I watched the snow fall through the kitchen window and tried not to remember the way he used to trace his thumb across my wrist. We came back Sunday night. I unpacked slowly. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired. He went to bed. I stayed in the kitchen, washed a glass twice, wiped the counter 3 times. My hands wouldn't stop moving. On Monday, there was an envelope on my desk. No name, no handwriting, just sealed. I opened it. Inside, a single sticky note. It read, "You made me stop, but you never left." I stared at it for a full minute before folding it again. I placed it in the bottom drawer, beneath invoices and tax forms no one would touch. I didn't throw it away. I should have, but I didn't. A week later, I found a forgotten cufflink near the break room sink. Gold, plain, just like the ones he wore on Thursdays. I picked it up, held it in my palm for a second, then placed it on the counter. Someone else would find it. Someone else would think it meant nothing. That night, I lay in bed and thought about the moment before it all began. The second before he turned the lock, when he waited for me to say something, to leave, to stop it. I didn't. And I keep returning to that pause, that quiet moment where I could have stayed who I was, where I could have chosen silence, but instead I chose to stay still. We haven't spoken since. He still wears the same cologne. I still pause when I smell it in hallways. I still hold my breath when I pass his door. And sometimes I still check the drawer where I folded that note. It's still there. I don't know why I haven't thrown it away. Maybe because it's the only part of this that hasn't disappeared. I told myself I'd never let it happen again. I told myself I'm not that kind of person. But the truth is, I don't even know what kind of person I am anymore. Maybe that part of me was always there, quiet, waiting like a key that fits the wrong lock. Am I the bad one here, or just someone who finally snapped? Be honest. If he never asked, was I ever supposed to?